The Black Sea, Sochi, Russia, a few weeks ago. The venue of the 2014 Winter Olympic Games. 4 years later, the Olympic arena is a memorial to the biggest sports fraud that has ever taken place at any Olympic Games. A restaurant awaits its evening diners. Few of the guests in the house might know what took place here in 2014, in the Sochi Anti-Doping Lab. Waiting for the Lord of the Rings. A report is about to be presented on state-sponsored doping in the biggest country in the world. On this day, we will bear witness to one of the most important decisions in sports history.
The report clearly lays out an unprecedented attack on the integrity of the Olympic Games and sports. The Russian Olympic Committee is suspended with immediate effect.
The IOC Executive Committee, headed by Thomas Bach, nevertheless wants Russian athletes to be invited to the upcoming Winter Games in South Korea.
These invited athletes will participate, be it in individual or team competitions, under the name Olympic Athlete from Russia.
La Fédération de Russie.
Russian Federation.
Russia, like here in 2014, will take part in the 2018 Winter Games as well, except for convicted athletes from Sochi and a few others, according to present status. The difference, Russia without a flag this time, and without an anthem. This is the IOC's decision. Is this really the last word in one of the biggest sports scandals in history? Is that what these two men wanted, IOC President Thomas Bach and Russian President Vladimir Putin? Russia and state-sponsored doping. A story about lies and deals, people who cheat and those who are cheated on. I want to know, who really pulled the strings? Who were the cheats? I've been looking into this topic since 2013. Those were the days when Thomas Bach was lulling the world of sports into a false sense of security. We can clearly say that both as regards to quantity as well as quality, this will be the toughest anti-doping program we have ever had in the Olympic Games. At the anti-doping lab, however, few cheaters were caught. Quite the opposite. Cheaters became winners, and urine samples of Russian dopers were switched. Operation Sochi ran like clockwork.
I declare the 22nd Olympic Winter Games in Sochi open.
You are bringing the Olympic values to life. Respect the rules, play fair, be clean. Respect the rules, play fair, be clean.
Russland holt Gold und Silber. Was für ein Erfolg für Russland.
I would like to thank the President of the Russian Federation, Mr. Vladimir Putin.
Number 1 in the ranking of nations. Putin's triumph.
I think it's the biggest impact with respect to doping that we've seen, yes. The biggest of all of the different problems that have gone on in different parts of the world. I'm thinking now like Balco in the United States, the GDR, Major League Baseball inquiry into steroids, etc. And I think it's also one of the biggest impacts that we've seen with respect to athletes.
We want to speak with those who, according to the files, were cheated out of the fruits of their training. Latvia, in the winter sports resort of Sigulda. At the bobsleigh and skeleton track, we meet brothers Martins and Tomas Dukos. They're preparing for the games in Pyeongchang. A family project, Father Dainis tells us he's the national coach. In Sochi, the Latvians lost against a Russian who has now been charged with state-sponsored doping due to incriminating documents. Once, Martins Dukos trained with him and others on this track.
Of course, it's painful because I grew up. They started here to train these guys, and I couldn't actually in the beginning believe that. And they told me how you can trust in this, all this, what's written and so on. But I said to them, why should I trust you? I'm in this sports 20 years, ruining my body, trying to reach some results. In my eyes, it totally ruined the Olympic passion, spirit and everything.
Dukos claims he has never doped. He remembers well how the Russian Tretyakov beat him in Sochi. Tretyakov was disqualified by the IOC, but has filed a lawsuit. In any case, Dukos wonders, what value would a gold medal have now, years later?
We're just robbed. As I said, this feeling is stolen already. If any answer will come after years, who cares about it? Nobody.
As per the IOC decision, Martins Dukos can now consider himself an Olympic champion. He's the first one ever for Latvia at the Winter Games. But nobody can ever give him back the lost moments of his sports career. The Latvian is one of many. In the course of journalistic research and the work of the anti-doping investigators, thousands of pieces of evidence have come to light. Records, secret emails, witness statements. What becomes clear is that thousands of athletes worldwide lost medals and titles, prize money and better placements because of Russian state-sanctioned doping. Far beyond Sochi, Moscow wanted to destroy all of this evidence.
Einige Scheiße versteckt sie sofort.
Alle E-Mails löschen.
Wir hätten sie letztes Jahr killen sollen.
Die lässt uns auffliegen.
4-mal so hoch wie der Grenzwert.
Wie zur Hölle dopen sie? Das ist eine Bombe unter dem Labor.
Ist alles unter Kontrolle? Die sind verrückt. Wo nehmen wir den Urin bei diesem Mädel ab? Die WADA beobachtet uns.
Hier herrscht Chaos. Alle E-Mails löschen.
Das Unter 23-Team. Wir haben keine Angst mehr. Eine Ohrfeige.
Fußball. Nicht anfassen.
Most of the documents came from him, Grigori Rodschenkow, once the director of the Moscow Doping Control Lab. In Russia, they claim it was the lab director who was responsible for the fraud. I've known Rodschenkow for several years. He was an inside source for me for a long time. His information turned out to be correct. Once his involvement in doping became clearer in the course of the research I and others did, the contact broke off. Investigations by the World Anti-Doping Agency followed. In Russia, colleagues of Rodchenkov's died suddenly. He fled to the US. He came clean to the FBI and in a documentary.
Does Russia have a systematic statewide doping system in place to cheat the Olympics?
Yes.
Were you the mastermind of a statewide system that cheated the Olympics?
Of course. Yes. We are top-level cheaters. To over-cheat us, you should be much such experience, but how it comes to such experience?
President Putin said again and again in the last 2 years that Rodchenkov was untrustworthy.
There never was any state-sponsored doping. In Russia, we have never had state-sanctioned doping. We don't have it now, and hopefully we never will.
What do you say about Rodchenkov?
What drugs have you given him for him to claim such things? It's just ridiculous.
In November 2017, a highly placed sports official spoke out on state radio, Leonid Tergachev.
А Родченкова просто нужно за неправду расстрелять, как Сталин бы сделал.
The man saying this is the honorary president of the Russian Olympic Committee. Moscow is hunting Rodchenkov with an international arrest warrant. The U.S. authorities have taken him into a witness protection program. Nobody can touch him. I keep in contact with his lawyer. Then a phone call. Rodchenkov is allowed to speak with me, and he wants to.
Where I have to go?
We don't learn details. Rodchenkov is being hidden somewhere in the U.S. We're asked to come to New York. The danger for Rodchenkov has become much worse, I'm told. Russians looking for him are said to have entered the U.S. I hear that he's just been moved to a new hiding place. No mobile reception, no internet, isolated from the outside world. Is an interview even possible under these circumstances? Waiting in a conference room. Rodchenkov must not leave his hiding place. But for us, they provide an audio connection to Russia's current public enemy number one.
Hello?
Hello?
Is it Grigori?
Yes, I am here.
I have no doubt. The voice, the accent, it's Grigori Rodschenkow. We begin the interview.
How do you feel personally after all the threats towards your person?
I enjoy each new day that I am alive and that I am doing my favorite things. How I could estimate whether I am safe or not? If somebody like professional killer is nearby, you cannot estimate.
A few months ago, we received a document. It supposedly comes from the investigation files. I want to speak with Rodchenkov about that. It solidifies the suspicion that Russia had established state-sanctioned doping a long time before Sochi 2014. Rodchenkov confirms the highly explosive contents of the document. This is what it's about. 2008, Beijing Doping Control Protocol and Scheme.
Doping scheme was developed on the basis of everyday practice under control of Moskauer Anti-Doping Center. High-quality anabolics. EPO was used in high doses, series of injections of recombinant human growth hormone, insulin and insulin-like growth factor. Athletes were protected from doping control by wide-scale urine substitution. Urine for substitution came from other athletes or coach.
2012 London Doping Control Protocol and Scheme.
The doping scheme was distributed among medal candidate athletes who were listed in state-approved group. Anabolics were dissolved in whiskey or vermouth martini for faster eluding. based on series of injections of new peptides. Athletes were obliged to have clean frozen urine 24/7 everywhere at home.
Initially, it mainly concerned track and field, says Rodschenkow. That was exactly what happened, he says. And he claims,
before invasion, it was very easy. You can do whatever you want. And all Russian athletics national team was doped. Between Beijing 2008 and London 2012, we changed our strategy how to cover up. We controlled everything.
Whether the whole 2008 track and field team was indeed doped will be hard to prove. For Sochi, says Rodschenkow, state-sanctioned doping was perfected, including the exchange of urine samples for Russia's medal hopefuls. And Rodschenkow reports who organized it, the FSB, the Federal Security Service. Rodschenkow, too, was an informer for the Secret Service. At the time, he tells us, he was proud of leading the world of sports on a merry chase. And then he claims something we've never heard so clearly before.
Of course, it came from the very top, from the president, because only president could engage FSB for such specific task.
Are you 100% sure that Vladimir Putin was aware of the doping cover-up scheme in Russia?
I am aware that Putin knows full and sharp details from Mutko. Mutko told me that Putin knew my name very well, and again, he was knowing everything because it was a very simple chain. I am reporting to Nagorno, Nagorno reporting to Mutko, Mutko reporting to Putin. Putin would like to know everything, and Putin's approach was, don't hide your problem, open your problem and threats, and we do everything to solve your problems.
From your point of view, it is absolutely clear that Putin was aware of the plans for the doping cover-up scheme for the Winter Olympic Games in Sochi.
Yes, he cannot deny it.
Did he order the doping fraud? These are serious allegations against Russia's president. After the interview with Rodschenkow, we inquire at the Kremlin. But Vladimir Putin's press office leaves our request unanswered. The IOC explains that a committee it had appointed had not found any evidence of Putin's complicity. Since 2013, the German Thomas Bach has been the head of this organization. The IOC is a not-for-profit organization that markets the Olympics and receives billions. Since Bach has been at the helm, money has been flowing even faster. At the same time, the IOC's crisis is obvious. Suspicion of corruption and vote buying. Olympics officials under scrutiny worldwide. Olympic Games, cities ruined, billions lost in costs. Olympic applications, cities are quitting by the dozens. On our behalf, Infratest DMAP surveyed Germans a few days ago. What does the Olympic movement stand for? For fair play and clean sports? Or rather for doping and corruption? 34% of Germans say it's about fair play and clean sports. 58% say it stands for doping and corruption. 4% think both. And 4% did not respond. The IOC, meanwhile, is reaching for new heights. It's building a palace, a new head office costing many millions by Lake Geneva in Lausanne. While Bach travels the world, always trying to be on equal footing with the powerful. Lausanne is the capital of the Olympic movement. I've met many IOC staff here for confidential conversations. I want to know, how did the approval for the Russians for the 2016 Games in Rio work? Was it really only clean athletes who ran? Bach wanted it like this: suggestions from sports federations checked by his IOC.
No Russian athlete can compete in the Olympic Games Rio 2016 unless he or she meets some very strict criteria. For instance,
one of them, in Rio, only those athletes were supposed to take part who had been tested independently for doping. This mainly means not by Russian inspectors. A few weeks ago, in Berlin, mail from Lausanne, no return address, but evidently from the innermost circle. A USB stick with hundreds of pages from the days before the Rio Games. Internal communications between the IOC and the summer sport associations. Statistics, emails, letters, including some addressed to IOC President Thomas Bach. A mosaic that casts doubt on whether the publicly announced strict admission criteria were really taken all that seriously. Time and again, we read, lack of information, details missing, have no test record at all, have not been tested, none have been tested. Athletes who had not been tested according to the original rules were allowed to go to Rio. When it came to approving Russian athletes, most federations were overgenerous. Was that the intention of IOC President Thomas Bach? In Bonn, we're due to meet with Claudia Bokel. She helped decide which Russian athletes were admitted to compete in Rio. Bokel comes from fencing, like Thomas Bach. She had been active in the IOC for years, made it to the IOC executive as an athlete spokeswoman. She was on her own there when it came to punishing Russia. To date, she's been keeping silent in public about the events from summer 2016. Now, she breaks her silence for the first time.
We wanted there to be hard consequences for Russia, and that Russia in particular would be excluded from the Games in Rio and in Pyeongchang.
Bokel clearly remembers the time when Rodschenkov's revelations made the extent of the scandal very obvious. Still, she says, the executive did not want a debate about excluding Russia from the Olympics at that point.
In the executive, we weren't allowed to discuss it, so possible consequences weren't debated there at all. And then the topic was off the table again.
What's it like to oppose Thomas Bach?
Well, I never really decide to be for or against a person, but for or against an issue, whether that's the IOC president or whoever. If someone convinces me of the opposite, I'm fine with that. But when the discussion isn't allowed, I always find that difficult.
The IOC declares repeatedly in writing that before making a decision, it had debated the case of Russia and possible consequences extensively within the executive. Were you feeling unwell at the time?
I definitely wasn't well. I couldn't sleep at night. I used to cry. I said I would step down. I don't know how to deal with that. And I thought about whether I should fly to Rio at all. And then I thought, no, you can't do that. There's still a chance that it could turn out all right.
Bokel did a lot of soul-searching, but she didn't want to give up. The athlete spokeswoman was appointed to a committee along with 2 other members of the IOC executive. Before the start of the games, the 3 were supposed to check the sports federation documents and decide whether to admit each Russian. Despite her reservations, why did Bokel take part?
I thought then, yes, I might be able to do something in this 3-man committee. Maybe I can bring in a degree of rigor again and make sure that only clean Russian athletes are actually admitted in Rio.
But when she saw the documents about Russian athletes, she could only realize that it would not even be possible to check them carefully in such a short time in many cases.
Well, there were federations where there were no out-of-competition tests at all. And then I kept saying at first, no, I can't accept that, this decision. I don't understand on what basis I can decide on that now. And then I said, I can't do it like that. I don't want it like that. It was impossible in such a short time to get through the documents in detail in this 3-man committee. I had to live with what I was given there.
You weren't able to cross-check it.
Look, you can see how it turned out in the end.
Russian Federation.
Federação da Rússia.
Many Russian athletes were admitted in the end. Bokel was resigned. She had imagined the work of the committee would be quite different. But while her colleagues in the 3-man committee rose up in the IOC, Claudia Bokel's time in the Olympic Committee came to an end. The ARD doping editorial team requested an interview with Thomas Bach for this film. We were told he had no time. Montreal. I have an appointment with the longest-standing IOC member. With Richard Pound. The Canadian doesn't beat around the bush, not even about conditions in the IOC under Thomas Bach.
There's really no room for much serious discussion and opposition. And your risk is, as I've discovered, is you become an enemy of the state.
If you challenge Bach.
Yeah, if you're critical of whatever action is being done, and it may be, maybe as the leader he takes that personally as opposed to organizationally. He's not flexible in taking on board different and possibly critical comment and suggestion.
Pound remembers the situation before the 2016 Rio Games. The executive under Bach were angry when the evidence for Russian state-sponsored doping came out just before the Games.
They were furious when McLaren's report came out before the Games in Rio. Furious. Said, you should have waited. Can you imagine what would have happened if that information was known and not disclosed before the Games? Everybody would say, well, you knew this, why didn't you tell us?
We sent a written query about this to the IOC. They tell us that any claims that they had tried to hold the report back were absolutely false. Pound is sure, if the scandal didn't affect Russia, it would have been dealt with quite differently.
Well, I think if this had happened, all of these activities had happened in Guatemala, you know what the answer would be. Guatemala would be out. There's no question about it.
Preferential treatment for Russia? This is something Pound is now worried about too. ahead of the Games in Pyeongchang, and he protests vigorously against it in a letter to Thomas Bach. Does Russia have a special status in the IOC? In Frankfurt, we're going to speak with someone who himself is a piece of sports history. Walter Tröger, aged 88. For a long time, he was in a position of power at the IOC as well, and is an honorary member, a long-running companion of Thomas Bach. But they did not get on well. Those who pull the doping strings in Moscow, he thinks, should receive harsher punishment from the IOC.
Das System ist verbrecherisch.
The system is criminal. The system has done things and forced its athletes, which is who I care about, to submit to it, of their free will or under duress. And the system must be punished. But for whatever reason, Russia has an incredible number of representatives in the international federations, federation presidents and others. And that has to do with money, of course. Nobody in Europe can do it and replicate it. So Russia plays a role, and the network is very tight in all areas of sports, and of course they make use of it. And Bach will notice that too. And in the end, sports also has a lot to do with politics.
Tröger is clearing out his office, moving out. 6 decades of life as an official packed in boxes.
Bach plays
the key role in the whole Russia story. He prepares these things carefully, in one-on-one meetings as well, so that he can pretty much assume that he'll get through. He won't walk into that trap. But it was really kowtowing to the Russians and to Putin.
A gesture of submission towards Putin. That's Walter Tröger's view at the end of his career as an official. The Olympics are still his life. But he has no influence on the decision about Russia. And that has led to the temporarily final act 2 months before the Winter Games in Pyeongchang. What was it Bach said? The IOC decision was
an unprecedented attack on the integrity of the Olympic Games and sports.
This decision should have been the final part of the Russia case. Bach says that the team of Olympic athletes from Russia, as they will be known, will be permitted to use their own flag and all Russian insignia as early as the closing ceremony of the Winter Games in South Korea. If only Russia accepts these conditions. As if nothing had happened. The IOC doesn't even say that Russia must take back the death threats issued against the man who uncovered the system of fraud.
That Putin knows full and sharp details.
Grigori Rodschenkow, the key witness, has to remain in hiding somewhere in the U.S. A final meeting in New York. With Rodchenkow's lawyer, Jim Walden.
Obviously, the Olympic Committee could easily say the suspension of Russia will not be lifted unless the Russians commit to standing down on their efforts to retaliate against the whistleblowers, including Dr. Rodchenkov. As long as that remains true, the IOC is in a very real way emboldening the Russians and in a way encouraging them.
His client, he says, must fear for his life. Perhaps forever. The darkest chapter in recent sports history, and it's not over by a long shot. Soon, the Olympic Winter Games will begin. The question is, how clean can these games be?